What is going on, you guys? It's your boy, the Almond Annihilator here, and we are back with episode 156 of the video game therapy series. I just turned the shaders on this time, just because I feel like the thumbnails looked a lot better when I was using the shaders. I don't know. I guess it is nice to play with them on once in a while, and not just all the vanilla. But I do probably prefer, in general, just the vanilla. The shaders seem to be a little bit too much stim maxing for me, using the shaders and not normal textures. But yeah. Anyway, um, I guess the first thought I had was just about another abstraction on technology, because that does seem to be it's pretty typical procedure for me, is figuring out another way. That kind of is really the way any of us think, is just having newer versions of just models, the way we model the universe. So just the way people work, the way governments work, the way technology works, and I think it does seem silly on some level, doing this over and over and over again, and just kind of like, oh, here's a new model I have for how people work, or here's another way that we can think about technology again and again. It does. I do understand how it could seem like a fruitless endeavor, but the other side of me also thinks it's critically important that we continue to do these things and have different abstractions. I just tend to think of abstractions that are related to technology, uh, and they're not always like metaphors or similes. A lot of times they are uh, just other tangential, I guess, considerations when it comes to technology. I think these are important, that we understand, because I think a lot of what we've created, we don't really understand or don't really appreciate to the degree that we should. Like, we might understand, I'll say, like, the mechanics of how the transistor works, and then, by extension, how a processor would work, and how computers could do stuff and communicate. And we might get all of that. We might understand, like, the technology itself, how it works. And most of us don't, but, assuming that they do, that still doesn't mean that they, like, someone that does understand that appreciates the gravity or the importance of said technology. And it only takes time spent thinking in these abstractions, or generating abstractions, or ruminating on other people's ideas about their abstractions about how things work, that we really begin to appreciate and understand, and really generate new ways of using said technology. I think, while a lot of the philosophizing and thinking of new ideas might seem really pointless, at least at this level, because, like, this type of philosophizing about technology doesn't really result in any new. I'm not making any new things, really. I'm not a research scientist. I'm just kind of, putting ideas out there. And while this part might seem useless, I do think there is value in this part of the, kind of research, or kind of thinking process. Because that's what the job is, and has always been. Has always been just thinking. It's not really about any of the minutia, whether it's factory work or anything else, or like programming even. The job of programming is to figure out what the problem is and how to solve it. Now, most of that, it used to be such that you would write code to solve that problem, and now it's just prompting AI and trying to debug AI problems, which does create more problems for people to work on. But they are arguably stupider problems, and they're more like dealing with social issues, like the same way a social worker, their day in and out is just dealing with people's personal problems, like, of this person, can't stop eating food. It's like, all right, well, great. I have to figure out, like, why are they eating food? Is there some problem, or is there why is this person doing this to themselves? I have to kind of try to understand, you know, uh, essentially an infinitely complicated being, a human in this case, and try to give them advice to get them out of this, stupid situation. Whereas people, like me, might be historically more gravitated towards fields that are more direct input output. It's like, even like a biologist at the petri dish is like, all right, if I expose it to these temperatures at this time, I'm relatively confident that XYZ is going to happen. It's not going to, it's not going to rob a store or something like that. It's not going to get a felony. Whereas, like, we work with people, they're all, to some degree, different degrees of loose cannons, where you don't really know what they're going to do. They're not really that predictable. And that, a lot of people hate that about humans, and, wish that, we were more predictable. But at the same time, then, like, that kind of is what a lot of this handoff to AI is we're now debugging black boxes that try to, like, pretend to be humans. These machine learning algorithms, despite not having any. There are human tendencies, at least, But with these, we don't. They kind of emulate human tendencies, but they might have their own tendencies, or we could program their tendencies, which I don't necessarily think is a better. You know, if you'd rather have me, a social worker dealing with actual human problems versus, we're trying to figure out an AI problems, or why an AI is, the next Mecha Hitler or something like that. I think I, would still at least prefer dealing with the issues of human people versus trying to debug problems that it's really just a computer that doesn't really have any. It can't do anything really. If we leave the computer alone, it's kind of helpless. Whereas people could do all kinds of damage, and aren't and are also kind of they're. I have an obligation to my fellow species. I feel, whereas I'm not a computer, so I don't really have an obligation to those computers. I guess if you're someone that thinks that we already are in a simulation, then I suppose computers are then your brethren. But I still think you'd be silly to believe that, just because I don't. There's no evidence towards that. The whole complexity theory is more telling of our shortcomings than it is of some creator's genius. But either way, an abstraction I had been thinking about technology is that it is a mask that people wear to kind of shield the world or shield themselves from their own incompetence. So what an example of that might be like. And I'm not saying somebody can't wash dishes or something like that, but even a dishwasher as a technology, somebody would never have had to learn how to wash dishes or even know what a clean dish looks like, or why we use soap, or why water, and like how to wash anything. It's kind of, it abstracts all of that behind just kind of this pretty black box. And something as silly as dishwashing might be say, well, dishwashing is a pretty simple conceptual thing. It's not like, is it really important that every human understand how to wash dishes? And I'd say no. But as we abstract to more and more things, where it's like, okay, do you know how to change your own oil? It's like, no, well, that's just for like handyman or whatever. It's okay. But then you begin to extract away more and more of these like technical competencies, to the point where someone that adopts all of the newfangled devices can't really do anything, and they kind of use technology as a shield. Even something as simple as like knowledge or like trivia. Like I will say trivia, the word within trivia is trivial, so it isn't. It's not like this stuff is like critical important to that everyone understands. What the capital of Bismarck is or something, or what business. I don't even know. I don't know. Just fucking random trivia. I'm not saying that is important for people to know, but technology now allows nobody to have to know anything anymore because it's all on the internet. It's like, well, I don't really have to know how to do this because I can just look it up and it's on there. And I think there are a lot of issues with that, not only with not really developing our own abilities, but I think it also is shielding our own egos from the pain of just not knowing things. Because I think that was much more common historically. Is you'd have some kind of problem. Okay, your water heater's not working, and you don't know why. And you're not a water. Now you can just kind of Google it or call the expert or something. And I would argue that like when it comes to home repair and stuff like that, like no one really knows everything. But I think people used to be able to, like, all right, I kind of feel stupid right now. I'm gonna like work towards this and try to understand what this is so that I can solve this problem. And used to kind of feel just like not like shame with not understanding it, being like, well, I at least like I want to understand this, or some kind of desire to be like, well, I don't understand this. Not understanding something is mildly frustrating to me, and I would like to understand it. So now I'm actually going to try to understand it. Whereas now it's like, well, good. I can just Google it. I don't have to do any of this. Like I don't care. Like it doesn't matter to me. I can just Google it. And there's not really any of that. Again, shame is kind of probably too strong of a word, but there's none of that shame that comes with not knowing how to do something, and then that doesn't really let you motivate yourself to learning said thing. So you never really learn how to fix a water heater or how water heaters work, or all the other parts, because when every time you go on some kind of journey to learn something for the first time, you really have no clue what you're about to learn. Like you don't know what you don't know, which can be a good thing in the sense that you're always kind of discovering new things. Like who knew that what kind of motor's in the water heater, or how hot it gets, or how it actually works. And part of that is satisfying in its own right, in the sense you're like, oh, it's really cool that like somebody came up with this idea. And oftentimes, I mean, this is how some people like discover new designs of something. They didn't know something, They open the water heater. They're like, why the fuck would they do it this way? This is the stupidest way. And then they invent a new way to actually do it, because of their prior experience. But they would have never have gotten that had they not kind of felt stupid, felt ashamed, and then go, okay, well, I'm going to actually figure out how to do this. And especially now where it's like people take pride in like not knowing anything and having, and they don't do so directly. It's not like people are happy at how stupid they are, but they just kind of think it's like funny or ironic or like, haha, I just look at the internet for everything. And it's like, it's not funny. It's not cute. It's not ironic, like to be a fat, lazy, stupid piece of shit. Like it's just not, that's not entertaining or cute or funny or like it should be depressing. Like you shouldn't laugh about you going to, get Cookout or something or McDonald's for the fourth time in a row. You should be ashamed of yourself. You should not be laughing about it and making jokes. Like, and I understand that humor is one way people can deal with things. And believe me, I I have tried. I think humor is a great way to relate to the world. But I think we are missing some of these like pangs of shame that people need to get. They need to feel bad for things and do better, right? I think that's just kind of what I want from people, including myself. So I don't ever want to be like ironically talking about how stupid or how little I know or how helpless I am or how I don't know how to do dishes or something as silly as that. And as stupid as an example as that is, I have heard stupider ones where people like refuse to like just learn basic like what cables are. Like they won't learn what a USB A or USB C or an HDMI cable is. So every time their TV turns off because their HDMI cord fell out, I can't tell them, oh, look for the HDMI cord. They're like, well, I don't know what that is. I'm not the computer guy. It's like, I'm not even asking you to learn anything that complicated. It's it's like three different words, like USB, like for HDMI, like they all look the same. It's like, I'm not asking you to learn that much, really. And it's like your refusal to adopt even a smidgen of like a learner's attitude is a problem. And I think technology only really makes that worse. So it just kind of masks our incompetence and shields our egos from what should be, like, man, I feel stupid, right? And the other problem with this, too, is that as technology abstracts more and more things away from us, because I felt like this, like, the more things I try to, like, all right, well, I'm actually going to, like, learn how to do this. Like, then it's like you're fighting an even further uphill battle because there's so many layers of technology on top of old technology on top of new ones. So it just continues to the point where like your foray into something, in order to really understand it, you have to be like a total hobbyist and have like thousands of dollars worth of equipment to actually do something. Or it's like, well, you're shit out of luck and you have to take that to the expert. The one example that I failed again, so I talked yesterday about how I have these two soldering projects. One being this mechanical keyboard that I kind of half worked and then I botched. And then now with these hard drives, which I tried to do today. But of course, lo and behold, I actually read the instructions now. And you need like a whole hot air station, which you can probably get one for a couple $100. But at some point, I'll have invested like $200 into like a microelectronics like repair station. To which point I'm like, all right, well, I think, is this really going to be a new hobby of mine? Like, do I actually have to go all in and buy, all this shit, or can I just take it to somewhere and just ask them to let me use their machine for 5 minutes? But the complexity grows. And then, people that do want to try to learn that, are okay with kind of feeling stupid and feeling, not again, the shame, but just kind of feeling dumb for a second. You feel really stupid because there's like, oh, I didn't know about this or this or this. I'm like, God, I don't know anything. It's like, geez, this is like, there's a lot that goes on with this. It's not really that simple. Where, some things, I have just kind of walked in within an afternoon or a day or two, I kind of get the gist of. And, you don't need a whole lot of expensive equipment. You can just kind of do it. But other things aren't. You kind of have to be this, like, half hobbyist with something in order to actually do anything with. But, yeah, it's either way. I just think we should try to lean into understanding how things work more. I think more people need to have this kind of, to not treat technology as just like some divine gift that's going to keep on giving and everything's always going to get easier. It ultimately doesn't. Like as things, as we replaced our dishwashing time and our, traveling by horse time with now it's like, now replaced it with like gooning or like watching porn, which is, I'd rather be riding a horse than watching porn. But you can imagine how the horse riders felt. They're like, oh wow, we can actually like have cars that take us places. We don't have to, ride on, old, Rusty or whatever. We can have to just sit in this car and, I can, learn about other things. It's like, no, instead people are going to just call an immigrant that's driving an Uber and jerk off in the back seat for 5 minutes, and no one's going to be any better. It's not like we're improving our capabilities, and that is the thing I keep coming back to is like I want people to improve their capacity to do things, and I don't really care what said things are. They can be trivial or silly or stupid or they could net nothing to society. I'm not even requiring that it has to do anything, but it needs to be true to you, and it needs to be something that isn't passive and kind of requires your attention. Like anything you can do while watching something else is not not an activating activity, right? It's not like you can call that a hobby. Reading is probably the like the line I would draw at. Like reading is not what I would consider an idle pleasure because you be actively engaged in reading. But I think audiobooks are where I is over the line, is now in pleasure territory. I don't think audiobooks are those don't count as a good activity for me. Reading is kind of the idlest that we could do. Beyond that, it should be more active. It should involve either your hands or your mind or thinking or you even like again I'm not I played I mean I guess I played this video game. I don't really play them anymore, but even like video gaming, if you're gonna like spec into that and be this video game monster, then like fine, like actually take it serious and like get better at it and like make it a whole thing, like be fucking good as shit. Like if you're gonna be the Minecraft speedrunner, then you need to grind on that. And again, like well, some parents and things are probably like, well, don't I don't want my kid to be a Minecraft speedrunner. It's like, well, it's better that than a gooner, right? And that's like most people fall into this like empty gooner category where they're just a gooner that doesn't really do anything and just kind of like barely gets by, and no one's you can't really get mad at them because they're not really doing anything. I guess they're not like an active hindrance, but they're certainly not. They're not doing what's best for themselves. By gooning all day. But whatever it is, commit to it. This is another kind of thought I had just with I guess how to live. We get the advice all the time of like take risks and like do what do be true to yourself and do the things that you want to do. And people say that a lot, but I don't really feel like I see people doing that. Like people might say that like besides people that do Molly and like move to a different part of the country or something, very few people take like these risks that well, if you're young and dynamic, go like try and do something. I think very few people actually like do that. They just kind of they might say that. It's like to say the one thing, but they don't really live that another. So I think with that, to put it in Gen Z brain rot terms, you got to spec out. You need to spec out into whatever it is. So it's like if you're going to do something, that doesn't mean you have to take whoever you are to the extreme extent and be like the weirdest, wackiest version of yourself. Like specking out doesn't necessarily have to mean weird. It just means like commitment. So like again, I'll use myself as an example here. Like this dumbass YouTube channel is like I think is is an okay reflection of one dimension of my personality. But I would say without I guess too much hesitation that I've committed to this at least. And it's like kind of my specking out. It's like all right, I'm gonna post these videos regularly. I'm gonna do them. I'm not gonna like do it for a month and then quit. Like I'm gonna like commit and just that's gonna be like part of the things that I do is like make these stupid ass YouTube videos. So it's like me specking out, is committing to something and doing it. Now you can spec out into anything. You could spec out into politics or snowboarding or I don't know, just not gooning, preferably. Really, gaming even you can be spec out. But I just want people to like become the most of themselves, which again doesn't necessarily mean weird or wacky or definitely not sexual, but just more of yourself. Like, well, who are you? And that I think requires, I think the time and solitude of reflection that people don't often give themselves. They don't really give themselves the space to discover who they are, what they value. They kind of assume that other people have wisdom, like the whole wisdom of the crowd thing, where it's like, I don't think it's wisdom of the crowds. I think it's like safety of the crowds. Like odds are, if you do what other people tell you to do, you're probably going to be safe, or safer than you would have been. But I don't know that you're going to be any wiser. I think that's a kind of a silly notion that you're going to be wiser in following the crowds. So yeah, I wouldn't say wisdom of the crowds. It's safety of the crowds. Anyway. Yeah, this is kind of more of a hot take, just about, and this also includes everything that I've ever said on the internet. But hot take is that nothing. And I mean, I guess I'll put nothing in quotes here. I'll say virtually nothing, but I almost want to say I want to say literally nothing. But nothing being said on the internet is really interesting. It's all just like fetishizing themselves for views, or for advertisers. Which again, I think is just kind of the wrong. I'm not saying people can't make a living off the internet because, I mean, I don't, but if I would, I wouldn't say I wouldn't refuse. But I think the way that people make a living off the internet now is an advertising based schema, which I think shouldn't be the case. It should be the only way people should be funded off the internet is through like, again, I'll extend the olive branch here to like something like Patreon. Now I don't like Patreon for a couple reasons. Uh, Mostly because it's closed source. But regardless, like Patreon is where people, like an individual person, like me, for example, is going to give $5 to a person and say, I want to support their work, unconditionally. I'm not paying. I don't represent a brand. I just represent a viewer that likes what they see. So keep doing that. That I think is a fine model. But given that like almost nobody makes their money exclusively off Patreon online. It's all like with advertising and YouTube revenue or TikTok revenue, which is again based on advertising. I think that itself poisons all the incentives for creators because they're not really making. I think it's an abandonment of themselves, which is the reason I wouldn't take sponsors or I don't. Not that I've ever had the opportunity to, but even if I was approached, I wouldn't, because it's not. It's I kind of view it as whoring myself out. And even if it's like a product that I believe in or use, I just don't think I should have to exchange. Uh, all right, sorry about that. Some stupid dipshit called me. It was one of those telemarketer things. They're actually not even telemarketers. They're just like, oh well, I'll give you a free roof inspection. Uh, do you want to do a free? It's like, no, I don't want to do that shit. It's annoying, and I don't own a house. And whatever it is that if you're cold calling me, there's no way your business is like a sustainable, good business, right? Like even if you are a roofer that does roofing, why do you need to cold call people? Like if your roofing services are that good, and like why are you cold calling them asking for free estimates? And I know it's like from a business perspective, you can rack in more people because like, oh yeah, I guess I do need or roof work done, but ultimately in my perfect world, people aren't roofing companies aren't cold calling people and annoying them. It's just like you're wasting everyone's time. Not only do you have to employ some poor soul that has to sit there and dial numbers all day and ask about roofing, but like again, I don't own a fucking house. Why the fuck are you calling me? I don't want any roofing work done. You piece of shit. Leave me alone. It's fucking annoying. Um, I don't know, stuff like that drives me nuts. Uh, Usually I do waste their time a little bit, or just give them a bunch of fake information, or I pretend like I'm a schizophrenic or something, just so that I get something out of it. It's like if someone's going to waste my time, I'm going to waste more of theirs, but I also want to give myself something entertaining to think about later. Um, Speaking of which, I do have this, I guess, a short story I can share about an Uber drive. So I was in a different town, and I don't have Uber. I'll just walk, or I'll figure out another way to get there if I can't Uber. But the person I was with Ubers, and I'll do that. I guess that's my exception. Is I'm with somebody and they want to Uber somewhere, fine. Otherwise, I'm just not going to go there. I'll figure out another way there. Either way, we had an early flight and had to get to the airport. So this guy came to pick us up, and immediately, I mean, any Uber driver that is accepting a 3:15 a.m. pickup for a 3:45 a.m. drop off is probably a bit of a character. And I guess this kind of goes back to my whole specking out thing. This guy kind of specked out in a way that is wrong, but I think it has more to do with him just not being very smart, and more of a failure of the educational system than I do, and kind of cultural system as well. But either way, you already know you're kind of getting into trouble if you're if it's a 3:15 Uber pickup. Anyway, so this guy pulls up in a Tesla. He pulls up in a Tesla, and Tesla's all the new ones are. I don't even know what the new ones are, but they all have these like comically large screens in the middle. I mean, the screens are they're way too big. It's like 24 inches. It's a full monitor in the center of everything. And so not only did he have the one screen on the Tesla, which I guess was for playing music, which I learned the hard way, I suppose. But then he also had his phone right next to it on the left side, again towards the driver, and that was just for TikTok. That was for TikToks. So he was like brain rotting himself while driving. The Tesla already has a huge screen, but he had a second screen next to it. And then above that, which is the only like acceptable secondary screen, was a GPS screen. It's like, okay, fine. I don't know why he'd have a dedicated GPS if he already has his phone, and it's like, doesn't the Tesla have GPS built into? But whatever. Besides that, he had three screens. He was screen maxing behind the car, and he pulls up, and we can hear like deep house music bumping from the speakers already. So I'm like, all right, this ought to be good. This guy's probably on an upper or something, at 3 in the morning. And then he's like talking to somebody on the phone. This guy's like, I don't know, late 50s, white guy, long hair, kind of like hippie-ish vibes. That's kind of the first impression. But we get in the car and he like hangs up. I supposedly talking to, I didn't really hear the end of the conversation, but he was supposedly talking to his girlfriend, which in retrospect I think was fake. I think he was like, pretending like he had a girlfriend or something, or his girlfriend's like a Thailand streamer or something like that, and is not really. It's like a parasocial relationship thing where he's like paying to be, the quote unquote boyfriend. Or maybe it's an actual girl. I don't know. It would just shock me if any girl had the self esteem to be with this guy. But whatever. Either way, we get in the car and he's like, "Oh, you guys mind if I play some of my music?" And again, it's 3:40, it's 3:30 in the morning, and we have a flight to catch, and we're like, whatever, like, fine, sure. Like, if it's really gonna help you get us to the airport, then I don't care. So this guy starts turning on his music, and then I was like, oh, it actually doesn't sound that bad. It's like house music. It's pretty generic, but it's like it's house-ish music. I don't know. It's got a big bass line and some build-ups and whatever. And then like within 10 seconds, he goes, it's I made it with AI, and I'm like, oh, great. This guy is a musician, quote unquote, that is using AI to help. He's like, well, see, I wrote the lyrics, and it's AI made the song. I'm like, all right, cool. He's like, what'd you guys think? And I'm like, yeah, it's great, whatever. So then he proceeds, over the course of the next like 20, 30 minutes to play like 8 more AI generated songs. Everything from like guitar acoustic covers with like thoughtless lyrics. Like, you'd to think if he's writing the lyrics for himself, he would have used AI to write the lyrics too, at least. Because you could tell the lyrics were bad because they were, those I actually would believe were written by him. But then calling yourself a musician as someone that writes lyrics to a song and lets AI generate crappy music, I think is insulting aging musicians, and again is the perfect example of technology kind of shielding a person from themselves, like shielding themselves from their ego. Because if this guy actually knew how bad of a musician he was, aka he has to like pick up an instrument, or at the very least like open some digital editing software and like try to make a beat, he would know how terrible he is. And I know that because I have made terrible beats and I've put them on this channel. So I've actually been the process of I am a bad musician. So I know what the perils of being a bad musician and not having musical talent, because I don't have any, but I still make stuff. But I at least know, oh, I don't have any musical talent. I'm not gonna pass it off like a rap god or something like that. My lyrics aren't that thoughtful. They're not, I write them in probably an afternoon most of the time. I don't give a shit. I understand that, it's mostly a joke, or it is a joke, really. And I'm not really expecting to be praised as a musician. But the problem with AI now, at least with this guy in AI, is that he now thinks that he's an actual musician because the songs don't sound that bad. And they just sounded, again, I'm not gonna say they were bad. Like, it didn't, there was consistency, right? And that's like kind of step zero for a song. Like, is it a predictable, consistent rhythm? If it's not, then it's like, all right, this music sucks because it's not. I can't find any rhythm here. There's nothing here for me to latch onto. So in the one sense, I think was good, but also he was like, as he was playing music off the giant Tesla screen, which was I learned with the sole purpose of that giant screen in the middle was for to go through his Spotify. But then the one next to it was to show us the TikTok reels that he made with the songs that he made. And then he showed us this like AI generated video of a cat like meowing, like, I love you, which again is, just to put this in perspective, it's a late 50s man with long hair driving a Tesla at 3:30 in the morning to the airport, playing us a video of an AI generated cat telling him that he loves him. That's the situation I found myself in. So you're putting that all together. Again, someone with self-awareness would probably go, "What the fuck am I doing?" And also, how did this guy even afford the Tesla? I don't understand. I mean, if I had to presume, he like within 10 seconds of the car ride, he told us that like his mom died, and maybe his mom gave him like money for that. Which, okay, maybe if it was like a week ago or something, and this music reminded him of her or something like that, I could kind of sympathize with that. But she died like 2 years ago, he said. So it's been years. You're already in your 50s, so your parents have to die at some point, right? And it's like if you made it to 50 something and then your parents died, your parents were around for long enough to let you go, right? You're a grown man. I mean, for God's sakes, you're employed driving a Tesla. And the worst part about it is we're on the way to the airport, and he's going like 15 under. And I'm like, dude, if we're booking a 3:15 a.m. Uber ride, we have to be somewhere. We cannot dilly-dally around and listen to your stupid fucking AI-generated music that's trash with lyrics that I believe that you actually wrote, but with a song that you definitely didn't make. Either way, it just blew my mind that people like that exist. And that really is, I think, the bottom for me when it comes to like AI usage is like people like that they use it to kind of like delude themselves into this like weird. And you could do this for many different avenues. It's not just like being a fake musician, but you could do this for like being like like a stockbroker. We've already seen this with people that have like the whole, ChatGPT induced psychosis or whatever, where they talk to ChatGPT like they're a therapist, and then ChatGPT tells them that, oh, like you actually are like a Giga Chad, like you should, sneak into this girl's house and like it's like, and then all of a sudden it's like there's a triple homicide because this guy deluded himself with ChatGPT thinking that this was like an okay thing to do. Because it's like, oh well, and especially this is another problem if we're humanizing and anthropomorphizing like technology. Because if we make ChatGPT therapist out to be in any way comparable to like a human therapist or even like a fitness trainer doing, something, any way that you're kind of personalizing or making AI more like a person, we then going to get more and more of these justifications where the AI will convince somebody to do something heinous, and then it's like, well, he was, and then they're just, and people are already like psychologically manipulatable because of advertising and technology as a whole has made, and the news have really made people very ripe targets for even just like regular propaganda campaigns. Like even think like you know 1940s 30s Cold War era communist ads, like that kind of propaganda, where it's not even really any different now. It's like now it's just propaganda for like sugar and just random crap that'll kill you. Which I was thinking about this in the supermarket the other day, where I don't think people that make stuff like, let's just give an example of like some plastic piece of shit, I don't know, like a stupid, a squirt gun that's a McDonald's cup or something. I mean, it's a piece of shit, yes, obviously, like it should never have been made, and anyone with the idea that like that stupid should be aware enough to know that this is worthless and the world doesn't need this. So don't make it, don't sell it to people. I don't care if Walmart will buy it. But then like I think it's also just kind of you don't really know, like some things that are in supermarkets, I genuinely think couldn't be that, like they may not be that bad, but then everything else just seems like it's just whatever people would like could be talked into buying. That's kind of what it is full of. It is like it's a world where every product I look at, I could go, well, I could kind of see how somebody could be convinced in a certain state of mind to buy this. But the shelf is full of it. It's like nothing, there's almost nothing I look at that's like, oh yeah, like this is like a smart, prudent, like yeah, there still are like basic necessities that people have, produce and stuff like that. But I'd say 85, 90% of the shelves are just filled with crap that I could only maybe kind of justify somebody might purchase in a very vulnerable state of mind. But beyond that, there's no excuse for purchasing or using any of this stuff because it's just crap, quality, even like the clothes and things. I don't know why you even want to buy these clothes. I think I'd either rather just wear the same thing over and over again that isn't this, or buy something of higher quality, or don't buy anything at all. Like I'd rather be cold and shirtless than to have to wear some of this stuff. It's just, I don't know, it's bad. But either way, I was it seemed like most of the things were just like, it wasn't that like people made products that were inherently bad, because that used to be my opinion, that like people just made shit that they knew was poisonous they knew was bad for people, or they knew would, but I think it's just they know people will buy them, and that's it. There's not like there's any, like sometimes they will buy things that are genuinely useful, they could be useful, that are like, oh, this is actually not even that stupid of a thing to buy. But in general, I think the only real litmus test for anything that belongs on the shelf is just like, could somebody potentially buy this? And that speaks nothing of its actual value, like it's functional or pragmatic or financial. Like it says nothing about that value. It's just, could somebody possibly be convinced to buy this? Okay, then it's on the shelf. I don't know. Um, yeah, I guess I to was thinking about this. Just hardship in general. Just because that that comes up a lot. I think it's good for. I've said before. I think it's good for people to have problems, and not problems that are chronic or permanent or result in death or anything like that. But I think there's a certain amount of adversity that is good for people, and I think parents especially are, in some ways, and maybe it's just because I'm coming at this at a very nuclear family, philosophy, where I think, there is like, meaning that there's like a father and a mother that provide some kind of guidance, and for families that don't, in general, I think a nuclear family, the father or mother, is a better way to be raised than, by a pack of wolves or by adoption care or something like that. So for the sake of this argument, I'm assuming that there's a nuclear family, in there. But I think part of the role of what parents should do is to expose children to adversity in a way that is, you know, conducive to their growth. And that much is obvious, but I think parents in general now are very bad at this because it's, and partially due to the amount of, again, I'll even use the word propaganda here through news about like safety and everything like that. And there are two ways really that you can think about like being safe or something, like just safety as an example, but this could apply to being financially secure, being well liked, being anything. It's like, you can, like, suppose like you feel unsafe for whatever reason. Who knows what the actual constraints are? Like, one, you can invest in more like practical, actual, genuine security. Meaning, like, if you don't feel safe, you could buy a gun, you could have hire a security guy, you could have cameras all around your place, you could, install a moat of alligators and lava. Again, you could do all this stuff to feel like, in order to feel safety, but that also, even doing any of that would not guarantee that you would feel safer. Right? You can still be the schizophrenic loser that's like has a moat full of alligators in the front lawn, and you're still like, well, I don't really feel that safe. Someone could jump over, or they could fly a drone or something like that. You could still really feel unsafe. The other way to feel safer is to lower the expectation of what safety is, or and that might sound more crude, of like, oh, don't worry about the guy with the gun right in front of you, but at least realistically understand risks to safety. So it's like, even like being in a more dangerous city like New York or something like that, you could feel unsafe every second of the day being there, because it's like, well, there's always could always be somebody lurking around a corner with a knife. Like, again, but you're going to feel unsafe thinking that. The other way, again, the way to kind of lower your expectations, to go, well, realistically, like, there's a gajillion people here. The odds of me and just me getting singled out and being stabbed is relatively low. So, unless there's kind of a more obvious threat, I'm not really going to worry about it. But again, people, I think, fall too much on the side of wanting all this pragmatic security, in this example of security. But again, this example could apply to anything else. Like with the amount of money you have, it's like, yeah, one way to like feel like you have more money is to make more money, or is maybe to budget, or it's just to be okay with less money, which I think is the better way to do things now, is to kind of at least more try to realistically understand the limitations of what you can get or not. And again, part of this is more kind of another dash at parents, is that children have expectations of a future, or of a life that I don't know that is that sustainable. And I think the kids that are turned on to this and not, psychologically ready to prepare for harder times, kind of assume that like their parents are liars and society's all bullshit, and they kind of adopt this like almost emo streak of how everything's gay, fuck you, which I don't think is a really healthy way to adopt that. I think, and again, the nice way to look at challenges is, all right, well, good, I'm gonna have a chance to learn something, or to prove to the world or someone else that I can do this, or XYZ, or that I'm resilient or something like that, is to kind of take it on the chin as a challenge, and not was like, well, they just lied to me. And again, like I've said before last episode, that I think older people have many reasons to be moronically optimistic about the future, and like to a point where it's like, why would you even believe this? To the point where you might convince yourself that you are a musician despite having no musical talent, discernible talent to me. The other funny thing about what that guy said is, he gets in the car and like within 10 seconds he's like, yeah, my mom died, and we're like, all right, that's that sucks or something. And he's like, well, so I wasn't a music major, but she was. And then it took me a second to be like, okay, he's trying to say that he has musical talent because his mother majored in music in college. Where it's like, A, I'd have to believe that a music major in college means that you are musically gifted. In the same way that, like, somebody that got a physics degree is somehow, like, they have to be gifted in physics. Like, not necessarily. Like, they could have just gotten through the degree, especially at a degree like music. Again, I'm sure it's, harder than, writing or something, or, communications or something like that. Writing might be hard. Who knows? But like that doesn't mean that you have any kind of passion for that. And not only that, you're also assuming that what your mom learned in college ended up being hereditary, so that you somehow inherited her collegiate information, like so that now that's okay. It's okay for you to make music because your mom majored in music in college. Like again, there's so many jumps intellectually uh, that again it leads me to just believe this guy was a complete failure of the education system, because it's like, all right, clearly he's like exhibiting some form of logic with this, in the sense that he knows that like people value education and we might be people that value education, but to then kind of jump from like, okay, people value education, my mom had an education in a certain field, her education was somehow passed down to me through genetics, such that I am, have musical education, therefore I have musical talent, which is different than education, and therefore I should be making music. It's like, all right, there's so many jumps with this. I don't even know how you ended up, with this. Or with the Tesla. Again, how'd you get the Tesla? What'd your mom do? I want to know. But either way, I was just crazy. But yeah, I don't know. Mm. I guess where I was going at with this whole like parents need to expose their children to more kind of not even constrained adversities, but even unconstrained adversities, and kind of help with them. But I think parents themselves aren't very, um, aren't a lot of some of them are ill equipped to understand what good adversity looks like, or they've lacked adversity themselves and they're too far removed from that. I think, you kind of need almost a parent or someone that's had horrible stuff happen to them, whether it's a war or some bad illness or something like that. Like you almost need some of that as an adult, or at least have gone through some of that to really appreciate what that struggle looks like. Because it's hard to kind of like, because I imagine it'd be hard for you to coach your child through like a world war, having never done that yourself, or like if you're 90 years old and a world war breaks out and you've only ever known, you know, LSD and happy times in your in your heyday. It's like, how are you really going to relate to someone younger than you that now has to go through something you never did? And that's why I don't really respect age as much in terms of like a measure of wisdom, because, and again, I think in historical times there may have been periods and societies where, in general, older people were much wiser because they had kind of experienced these firsthand adversities. But I think now there's almost a generation, or at least a subset of adults that haven't really had any real adversity throughout their lives. So how are they supposed to be these guidance? How are they supposed to guide people through times of adversity when they've never really experienced it themselves? And so they don't. Not only they not even think it's real, they don't really appreciate the struggles of younger children or whoever, but they just don't really conceptualize adversity on the same level. I think that is potentially, and that's also maybe why we see a lot of parasocial relationships where, like, young men or something look up to people that are different. They're not their parents, because these people in some way at least seem like they have somehow acquired the wisdom that their parents lack in some way. And another part of that is obviously like the ubiquity of the internet and the access to all this crap that young men are getting off in the first place. But that aside, I still think there are elements of unrefined parenthood, because I don't think the obligation of somebody, if you are a parent, to bring somebody into the world is to have reached a level of maturation such that you have the wisdom and experience and the grit to actually go through with raising a child into the world, with which would is into a world of potentially unforeseen, unheard of circumstances that you're not really going to have any control over. But if you've always really felt in control of your life, or you've never felt like things have been out of your hands and you've gotten them back, you're not really gonna. I think it's kind of silly to just then willy nilly bring a bunch of children into the world that you're not really prepared to raise in a way that's going to make them robust people, right? And just they're instead going to be weak, and they're going to flail and fall and fail at the first thing that ever happens, and not realize that that's part of kind of the process of maturation. They need that, and that is good for them, and it's healthy for a certain amount of that. So where I was getting at with this was the hunter goes into the darkest part of the woods. I said before how cool it is that some of these older like tribes and prehistoric, I guess it's mostly like Native American tribes that have done this, but they would send off like 13, 14-year-old boys just into the woods like alone, and they'd either like figure out a way to do it themselves and like scrounge together food for a couple days and find the pack or something, or they would just die out there. And it's like that might seem barbaric in our standards because it's like, well, no, they need to like have sex ed or something like that. Whereas in their time this wasn't barbaric. This was how somebody earned their like. And yeah, sure, I'm sure some people got lucky. I'm sure there was some Giga Chad 14-year-old that like tripped over a rock and just sprained her ankle and then died and got eaten by a tiger. Like, yeah, I'm sure that guy would have been fine in the gene pool. He just got unlucky. But I think in some ways they were kind of willing to take that risk, and they obviously didn't do it this way. They didn't think about it like a behavioral economist. They kind of thought about it in a more spiritual way, but they're still willing to take that risk, knowing that they wanted strong blood or something in the tribe. They didn't want weak blood. So if they didn't return, it was a sign that they weren't ready to be adults, and they'd be fine with just kind of letting them live out there. But I think that also that doesn't I think nowadays if a parent that kicks their kid out at 18, the kid's almost like like fuck you mom and dad, like you didn't help me or whatever, and it's almost like instead of treating it as a gift or like a rite of passage in some way, it's almost like a slight because they and maybe there are cases where they genuinely would need the help of the parents, and it's not it isn't prudent for the parents just to nuke them and send them out, but and I do think it's reasonable for there to be rites of passage for young people and for them to have experienced at least enough adversity to get through life without to get through life, I suppose. Mm. Let me move on to something else on my topics list here. Um, mm, yeah, I guess I want to talk about this difference between loneliness and solitude. I think inherently loneliness does have more of a negative connotation than solitude. Meaning that like loneliness people kind of see as bad, whereas solitude people don't really think of it as being that bad, which I would agree with that at least to that degree. Um, but I guess to further delineate, we are a very lonely, an anxious and lonely generation. There was that book, or the anxious generation, or the something like that. But I think in general we are very lonely. It's a very lonely time, with the internet and everything. And because of that we get loneliness. But I think one way to kind of spin this into a positive, to kind of bring it back to this whole like how can this be a challenge for you thing, is to even instead of being lonely and kind of being sad that you're alone, is just to kind of embrace solitude as an activity. And solitude, I think, is you can differentiate it from loneliness by the intention at which you are engaging in it. Meaning that like loneliness, I think, is like that you're alone. You're kind of self-conscious and aware of the social aspects and negativity that comes with being not around other people. So you're lonely and you're alone. Whereas I think solitude is almost like a rejoice and a celebration and allowance for you to explore yourself. Not physically. I'm not talking about jerking off. I mean, just mean exploring your mind and the things that you believe and the things that you value, and really just mulling ideas over in your head to yourself. Which again sounds schizophrenic in the sense that I'm asking you to talk to yourself, but in a lot of ways I think that is what solitude should be: is conversations, honest conversations, frank conversations with yourself. Like, what do I care about this? Like, what about this person? Do I, and it can be about, superficial things. Like, it doesn't have to be about, your underlying values and what you want to do with the rest of your life, or, it can be even about stupid things, but just kind of, allowing time with yourself not to be miserable, I think is a very, very important skill, and is kind of the skill of solitude. Because I think many people they're not able to spend that much time with themselves, and they kind of shudder at the idea of spending time alone, or just having thoughts and time to themselves, or being bored. So if they are alone, they then just put something in their ears or in their mouth, or just any way to distract them from being with themselves and just listening to their own minds and their own intuition. And I think that really will tell you all you need to know. I really do agree with this kind of natural, intuitive sense, this way to intuit what what you should do with your life or whether you're going right or wrong. I do think everyone might not have an inner voice, but everyone does kind of have an inner intuition. And people that don't haven't got in touch with that yet, and they haven't really given themselves the space of solitude to be able to listen to what they actually think. So therefore, it's a dangerous place to live because you don't really believe anything, and all your beliefs are empty or fickle if you haven't really questioned yourself and let giving yourself time to really ask yourself hard questions and wrestle with them. Not to say you have to answer them or that you need to come out away after one session of meditation with all the answers to who you are, but it's a long process. But I think allowing that process to occur and getting deep into these periods of solitude, I think are really important for people, myself included. Which I don't just do. This isn't necessarily my time of solitude. I do lots of individual meditation where I'm not talking to people, or I'm not playing. I'm not filling my eyes with the pixels of Minecraft. But I do really at least venerate solitude and strive to be the person that is okay being in solitude and never being lonely, being alone. Right? You don't have to be lonely just because you're alone. There's many ways to embrace loneliness as solitude and not as social ostracization. But whatever. I'll leave it off there for this time. Thanks for watching. Peace out.